Hello. Today we look at painting in the context of visual art. Painting is one of the practices, and painting goes the history of painting and the practice of painting goes long time back into the prehistoric times. So what is painting? Today we will look at painting and different kinds of paintings that are done, as well as different types and mediums and materials using which paintings have been done through various centuries, and what kind of expressions have been produced. So what is painting? Painting is a visual art consisting of an artistic composition made by applying paints on a surface. So for painting you need a flat surface on which you apply paints, right? Like drawing you need a surface, painting also needs a surface, but when it comes to painting, painting is more evocative. Painting has the potential to create more or to trigger emotional sensibilities. So painting is more complex a visual art than drawing. Drawing has its own interesting complexities. You have complex drawings produced by artists, but painting is pictorial, right? It has more colors, so it has a potential to evoke different emotional sensibilities in the viewer. When we look at painting, we feel more intensely, and there are possibilities to feel intensely, and painting is more expressive, right? So today we will look at the details of painting, and this is one of the early examples of painting coming from France. And if you know, painting is a form, along with drawing, painting is a form which existed, which got formulated and used by men long before language was formed, long before words and letters were formulated or written, long before sounds were organized into words. So painting is a form that was a communicative medium, that through painting and through drawing, communication used to happen in the prehistoric times, before the scripture was formed, right? Before the writing was formed, painting was a very important medium of communication, and this is one of the examples of such communication. This is a cave painting coming from France, and you can see this is from 32,000 to 30,000 BCE. I mean, so many centuries back, painting existed and it had a particular role. So why did they do painting then? What was the purpose? Painting always had some kind of a purpose, sometimes emotional, or other times it had a sort of a communicative relevance. So this particular image that you are seeing is a cave painting of a bull, right? So in the caves of that time, and art historians proposed that these paintings, and there were thousands and thousands of such animals, particularly animal drawings and animal paintings were done. So these drawings and paintings played a ritualistic significance. They were used for rituals. What were the rituals they were doing then? They were doing this ritual before the hunt. So in these paintings, if you see, what you see is the representation of hunting animals. You have men, you have people hunting animals, and if you look at these paintings, human figures are drawn very schematically. Human figures are drawn in almost stick-like drawings. But when you look at animals, they are drawn with a very realistic feel to them. You have a good volume, good sense of volume, a sense of animation and movement, right? During the hunt, while hunting happens, animals run around, right? So these paintings captured the movement of the animals. So the artists, they were not artists at that point of time, they were not called artists, they themselves did not know that they were artists, but anyway, they had a purpose for doing these paintings. So what are the materials they used? The materials were largely charcoal, that the coal that was available by burning, and these cave paintings were very much inside. very much inside the cave, very interiors of the cave where light could not reach easily. So they had to burn, they had to use fire. So coal was very much available to them, and animal blood was another pigment. Along with animal blood, they also used to use a sort of a natural earth materials that they used to get. So animal blood, animal fat as an adhesive to stick, to make it stand, and these pigments, these images survived all these years because they were inside the caves, right. So this is one of the early examples of what we can say the practices of painting. And what purpose it served? It served a purpose of ritual hunt. They would conduct the hunt in the painting, and with the belief that they will actually can hunt, they can hunt the animal very easily. So the planning, it worked as a kind of a plan. So you make a plan before you go to the hunt, right. So these paintings were like plans for them, and they also had a ritualistic belief. So it was not just a plan, but it also had an element of belief embedded in it. So this is one example, this is another example, and you can see the horse, it's more colorful. This is another cave from France, again of the same time period, the 30,000 BC, around 30,000 BC. The horse is moving, and you can see arrows falling on it. The marks that you see they are basically the suggestions of arrows, or suggestions of spear, or a tool that is aimed at the horse. And the horse is painted with blood and fat, and the body is drawn with charcoal. So you can see here the animation of the horse is captured, and the volume, the round quality of the horse, the solidity of the horse is captured. So you can see by that time, artists, the men of that time, the hunters, they could manage to capture, they could manage to understand the importance of representation. They could understand how to represent these animals. They knew how to draw and how to paint, but the purpose of drawing and painting that they did on the surface of the cave is very different. So we have seen here one surface, which is the cave surface, right. And they would use the undulating surface of the cave, because cave surface is not flat like paper. Cave surface is undulating, uneven. So they would use those undulating surfaces, undulating forms within the form of the animal. So they were quite intuitive in that sense, how to use the surface. So this is one surface on which charcoal, blood, animal fat, and the earth colors, the dry colors that were available to them at that point of time, they used them. So this is in India, this is in Madhya Pradesh, called Bhimbetka. There are a set of caves discovered in this place called Bhimbetka, and it is named Bhimbetka. Bhimbetka came from Bhimbetka, so the place where Bhim used to sit, that was the idea. So the cave is named as Bhimbetka. That place, the name of the place is Bhimbetka, and that same name is given to the caves. So this is again one of the early, again around 30,000, 40,000 BC, early examples, one of the early examples in India of cave paintings. And you can see here the figures, the human figures and the animal figures. You can see the same kind of themes here also, animal hunting, but also a sense of community. You have people in groups. So when you have people in groups in some activity, you can kind of assume that they are representing a community. So this here you can see different narrative kind of forms, and you can see something like this. And art historians have also there are myths and stories saying that Mahabharata is represented in painting, in cave painting, is represented here in Bhimbetka caves. And you can see this example where you have elephants, and it is a war scene. You have people sitting on the elephants, and you have people throwing arrows at other people. So this is not hunt, but this is war. So war is a later stage of human civilization than hunting. So this as you can see is a later painting than the one that we have seen just before, right. So even here they have used animal blood, earth colors extensively, and you also have representations of people extensively, unlike what we have seen in France. So these again, you have surface, you have stone surface, right. So these are two very early examples of painting that existed before the formation of language, before the formation of script, right. And so we have seen one surface, we will go ahead and then see further surfaces of painting. So let us look at what are the mediums, materials and techniques of paintings, how many ways paintings are done, right. So one of the early techniques is fresco. When it comes to painting, fresco is one of the early painting techniques, and within fresco you have two types, and you have them here on the screen: fresco buono and fresco secco. And the fresco buono and fresco secco, or these two terms are Italian terms, right, but it is used extensively throughout the world. Fresco buono is a technique where a mural is done when it is done on wall, right. Fresco is a mural technique. Mural is always done on the wall, right. So you already have a wall on which you apply plaster, lime plaster, and fresco buono is a technique when you apply color on the wet lime plaster. So what happens when you apply the color on wet lime plaster? The color is absorbed by the lime plaster. So the color gets absorbed into the plaster and it stays for years and years. You do not need to have an extra adhesive, extra gum or extra medium to bind color with the surface, right. So the surface is already wet. When the surface is wet, you are applying color and the color gets into the surface. You do not need an extra adhesive medium. That is fresco buono, and fresco buono is extensively used from, let us say, Greek times, and also Ajanta is one of the examples, Ajanta, Ellora, and we have other South Indian examples like Sittanavasal, Lipakshi. So fresco buono is a technique which is extensively used, and which is why all these murals, all these fresco murals still survive and we can see them. Another technique within fresco is fresco secco. Fresco secco is a dry technique where when the wall is dry, you apply color. So when the wall is dry and you apply color, for the color to stay on the wall, you need a gum, you need some medium which binds the color with the wall surface. So for that, people use egg white or egg yolk or glue or different kinds of oils. So different traditions and different regions would have their own specific kinds of binding medium, right. So in the context of Egypt is one of the early examples where you can see fresco secco. You also have in Italy, people have done fresco secco, and also in India. So different regions would use different kinds of binding material. So these are two types within one technique, one medium called fresco, fresco buono and fresco secco, and two different ways of painting. This is one of the early examples of fresco painting, and this is old Egyptian fresco, right. So this is, as you can see on screen, 2613 BC, around that time. So it still survives, though in fragments. The frescoes done during the Egyptian times, during those times, still survive. And as you can see here, Egyptian ways of painting, and much of painting, the painting examples of Egypt come from the frescoes. And as you can see, Egyptian technique and Egyptian style of painting is very different and very unique, right. So how do you see? When you see it, you see the face is shown on the side, right? Face is shown in profile and the body is shown in the front, right? So when you stand, when you turn your face, but you cannot stand like that and the legs are shown in the side. So it's a very difficult position and people cannot stand like it, but they evolved this as a style, because if you know, painting or drawing profile is very easy, and I'm sure you might have tried, where if you want to draw a face, you try to draw a profile, because that is the easiest way or method of drawing a human face. And when you have to draw a body, the torso, the frontal position is the most easiest position of human body to draw, and similarly legs in the sideways. So Egyptian method of figure drawing is a combination of different views when you look at, right? And the combination is determined or guided by the approach to drawing which is more easiest and which is more recognizable, right? So if you look more and more Egyptian examples, you can figure out how the same kind of figure is repeated, the same technique or the same method of drawing is repeated, method of figure drawing is repeated, right? So this is one of the early examples of fresco paintings we have, and this is little later, this is in Italy, right? This is a very great artist called Giotto, who is considered to be the father of Renaissance. He started painting in a particular manner using fresco. He sort of extensively explored the fresco technique and fresco buono, the wet on wet technique, the wet color on wet plaster. So this is an example of the Renaissance, that which is Giotto's time is 13th century, 12th, 13th century. So during that time he sort of revived fresco tradition and he painted extensively Christian themes, right? So this is an example of his painting and an example of fresco, and you see here this particular technique, this particular painting is very different from what we have seen in the context of Egyptian art. Here you have figures look more like they are animated, they are it is the theme of nativity. It is nativity means the birth of Christ, when Christ was born, and that is the moment which is called nativity, and you have angels coming on the top, right? So the figures look more human-like, unlike the Egyptian figures. Here the figures look more voluminous, more naturalistic, more real than the schematic Egyptian painting. So this is one of the early examples of the late medieval painting, which is the Renaissance painting in Europe. This is of the same time but little later than Giotto, and the figures you can see here are more elegant, and you can see the light and shade, and all these effects are created by using fresco technique. And fresco, as you can see, wet on wet technique is a long time taking technique. It takes a long time because the plaster has to dry and it takes really a long time. So artists have to really calculate how much time and how he is going to organize the figures, how he is going to organize the entire environment, as well as how he is going to organize the light. So it is a very complicated technique which takes a long time to dry and long time to get the skill of painting in it. So this is the theme of Annunciation. Annunciation is nothing but an angel comes and discloses to Mary that she is going to give birth to a child before her marriage, right? Before her marriage, she is going to give birth to child. So this story, this particular secret is revealed to Mary, and that moment is called Annunciation. And this is the moment that the artist Fra Angelico is representing. And this is painted in a monastery he was staying in, and monasteries were very important when it comes to the spread of Christianity, and this painting makes an important sort of a statement of religious belief when it comes to Christianity. So as we go ahead, we can see, let us take an example of Indian painting, for example Ajanta caves. And Ajanta cave paintings are one of the early examples of mural painting in India. And mural actually is the first technique of painting, and later you have different techniques that evolved, and we'll look at them as we go ahead. So this is an example of Ajanta paintings, and Ajanta paintings, the figures are really elegant. The drawing is very skillful and very elegant line is used, and the figures assume liveliness, assume volume, solidity. It also has a sense of plasticity. Plasticity means the feel of flesh and blood, as if they are living, and they are also very expressive. So Ajanta artists could actually, could actually represent all these qualities during that time. So this is one of the examples, and Ajanta technique of painting, both in terms of the figure, color, light and shade, as well as the very medium of applying the colors onto the surface. The technique of fresco is really complex, and colors, for example, a color called lapis lazuli, which was a very costly color, used to come from Middle East and outside India. So Ajanta artists have actually discovered the pigments around the region of Ajanta, and they have used them, ground those colors, and then used for painting. So these are basically earth colors. They have made their own colors using whatever stone ground colors, earth colors that were available, different pigments that were available, and they use them. So this is one of the early examples, the Ajanta painting from India. And this is an artist who is very famous, Michelangelo, and he painted the ceiling of Sistine Chapel. And this is a fragment of Sistine Chapel. This is called the creation of Adam, and he also used extensively the fresco technique for his painting, and he explored really extensively. He explored different possibilities of painting, fresco painting, and he created a technique called, he used the technique of drawing called foreshortening. He's one of the first artists who has used foreshortening very successfully. And here, what is foreshortening? If you look at the slide, look at the hand of Adam, the hand on which he is resting, his right hand. And if you look at the right hand, you can see that it is foreshortened. You look at the palm on the reverse side, and you look the entire arm. You look at the entire arm. The method he is using in drawing that is nothing but foreshortening. So Michelangelo is a very important artist when it comes to painting, fresco painting in the context of Renaissance, and he falls at the time of high Renaissance, around 16th century to 17th century. So we have seen fresco, we have seen cave painting, and how natural colors, earth colors are used, and animal blood, fat are used. And we have seen different types of frescoes from different regions, Egypt, Europe, Italy particularly, and then also India. And now we'll move towards another medium called encaustic painting. Encaustic painting is nothing but mixing pigment, the powder pigment, with wax, and it was largely beeswax rather than paraffin wax, because beeswax is more malleable, it doesn't break, it is not brittle. So pigment is mixed with beeswax and then applied. So again, beeswax is a different it has a different quality, it gets dried up, right. So, the artist needs to understand how much time the pigment can stay liquid and then how to apply onto the surface, and the surface that is used for beeswax painting, that which is encaustic painting, is largely the wooden panel. So, till now we have seen mural painting, that is done on the wall, the surface was wall. Now we have seen another surface which is wooden panel, and this is one of the examples of encaustic painting. Again, encaustic painting was very popularly done in Egypt, right. So, we have examples coming from Egypt of encaustic painting, and this is one, a mummy portrait, right. So, on the mummies or on the coffins, what we call coffins, they used to make these very realistic, very expressive paintings on the surface of the mummies. This is another example of encaustic painting. Again, this is a Byzantine icon painting. This is called icon painting. The painting that you have seen earlier, this one, this is portrait. It is not icon painting, right. But an icon painting is nothing but, if I give you an example, for example, you take the image of Lakshmi, right. Lakshmi has an iconography, right. She stands on a lotus, she holds a lotus and she gives you money, right. Or you take another example of Saraswati or any god or goddesses. Every god and goddess in the context of India, Indian gods and goddess, they hold something, they have their own vehicles, so all these form their iconography, right. So, icon paintings in the context of Christian religion, and this emerged around 6th-7th century in Byzantine particularly, and it spreads throughout Europe, but Byzantine is the place which is very famous and which still, like, artists still continue painting icon paintings. So, encaustic is used for icon paintings also. This is one of the early icon paintings from 6th century of one of the saints, and you see icon paintings are largely of Virgin Mary and Christ, or saints largely, or evangelists. So, it was meant for the religious purpose and not for anything else. So, icon painting is meant for religious purpose. So, this is one of the early examples of icon paintings where encaustic is used. So, encaustic is a material which is used extensively during that time, and this particular image again is coming from a monastery from Egypt. So, Egypt is a place where encaustic was extensively practiced, and very skillful encaustic paintings could be seen from there, right. So, another medium, very important medium that cuts across different centuries is oil painting. Oil painting spread throughout the world, and it became an international medium very soon. So, it is a process of painting with pigments that are bound with a medium of drying oil, right. So, oil should be in such a way, or the oil that is used for oil painting should have a character of drying. It should dry and form, it should not stick after it gets dried. So, linseed oil is used for oil painting, because linseed oil has a quality that as it gets dried slowly, it becomes a transparent film. It forms a film on the surface on which you apply it, right. So, if you mix pigments, if you mix powder pigments with linseed oil, what happens is that, for example, if you mix yellow powder with linseed oil and then you paint on the surface, it takes a week or 4 days or 10 days. Within 10 days it becomes dried and it does not come out of the surface, because the linseed oil makes a film of the yellow color, right. So, this character is used and explored by the artist called Jan van Eyck. Jan van Eyck is credited with creation of or invention of oil painting. And by the invention of oil painting, the painting got revolutionized. It was the possibilities of painting were explored extensively, and you could paint very complex and intricate forms within painting. And this is one of the examples, one of the important examples of 𝗳𝗏𝗧 painting called the Virgin of Chancellor Rollin. And if you look at this particular painting, you have Chancellor Rollin on the left side and here Virgin Mary sitting on the right side holding the Christ, right. Look at the entire room, the carpet and the garments that Rollin as well as Mary is wearing, and the angels who are on the top, and you go back and then look at the opening and you look at the landscape outside, and each and every object is very intricately painted. And this particular detail and intricacy could be possible because of the oil medium. It cannot be possible in fresco, it cannot be possible in encaustic, because oil gives the artist that amount of time. Oil is a medium which takes a lot of time, a long time to dry, right. So you have a lot of time to paint more intricately, more detailedly, and it gives you that time to manipulate, to paint more and more clear and detailed, intricate details. So this is so oil painting really revolutionized the method of painting, the kind of realism, the kind of detail that you can create. How do we understand it? So you have Mary placed on the right side, and Rollin is approaching, is on the left side, and the artist has left the central space, the space in the middle, for the viewer to go out and look at the river as well as the landscape, the actual landscape of the Netherlands, right, because the artist belong to Netherlands. So here the planning, is very interesting, where you are looking at the interior, very richly decorated interior space, as well as after you spend time looking at the interior space, you are welcomed, you are allowed, you are left to go out, out into the space, into outside. From inside you go outside and look at the space outside, the environment outside. So to do that, to make that possible, the artist has actually composed figures in such a way that that space is available for the viewer. So composition, here you have two figures on either side balancing the painting, and in the center you are allowed with this, as if you can actually walk through visually, virtually, you can walk through this space and then go and then look at the back what is happening. So it's a very interesting composition by Van Eyck. Another painting by the same artist, Jan van Eyck, is the portrait of Arnold Finney and his wife. This is a wedding portrait. During the time of wedding, photographs are taken nowadays. So during that time, only few people, only wealthy people could ask an artist to paint, So Jan van Eyck was asked to paint by Arnold Finney. Giovanni Arnold Finney was an Italian merchant, was a wealthy merchant, and that was the time where mercantile business was really expanding, and Arnold Finney got married, and then during the to mark the moment of marriage, to make it as a memorable event in his life, he asked the artist to paint this portrait. So the portrait is not just a face, but you have the entire scene where Arnold Finney is there holding in a very delicate manner the hand of his newlywed wife, right? And look at the way the composition is done here also, and this is an oil painting again, and you can see the detailed treatment, different objects are painted. It's not just two figures who are standing on either sides of the composition balancing the entire composition, but you have the slippers of the lady who just left, and this leaving the slippers aside and standing separately means this is a sort of a ritualistic, so it has a ritualistic significance. And you have a dog over there, and if you go back you have a very exquisitely painted chandelier, the lantern, actually the lantern on which you have candles, and he's holding the hand, and the very gesture of holding the hand creates a sort of an arc, a reverse arc, and through which you can go back and look at the convex mirror on the wall. And the convex mirror is also painted with very intricate detail, right? And all this detail, the intricacy of the detail and the effect of light, I mean this particular effect of light which has different variations of different colors. You have different variations of green, you have different variations of the red bed right behind her, and you have different intricate details of other objects, right? So oil painting, oil as a medium really helps, really gives the possibility for the artist to create many variations of one color, create many variations of one particular hue. So this painting, both compositionally as well as in terms of medium, in terms of technique, it is a very significant painting, and we can understand both the techniques of oil painting and the potential of oil painting, as well as the sense of composition, the complexity of composition that an artist can create, and how the light is played, light is affected, the entire space, the very soft, very beautiful light of the late morning or late evening. So this is another example where oil painting, oil medium can be understood, and the potential of oil medium can be understood. This is a still life. Still life is a genre. Genre is nothing but a kind of painting or a kind of expression, a category of expression, a category of painting, where still life is a category of painting, landscape is another category of painting, portrait painting is another category. Like that you have different categories, and these categories are termed as genres. So still life is a genre, is the genre which emerges during Baroque times in Europe, that which is around late 16th, early 17th century. So around 17th century largely, and that also emerged in Dutch. So Dutch still life is very famous. So Dutch artists have explored oil paints for painting still lifes, and this particular image that you have on screen, it's a still life of nothing but food and objects, the glassware, a silver Tazza and oysters. And you see the artist has used oil medium to paint these different objects, the silver, the transparency of the glass, and the liquid in the glass, and the liquid in the goblet, right? As well as you have a fruit, the lemon, which is peeled off, and you can see the inside of the lemon. You have the shiny oysters, you have the plates, and each and every object, from lemon, oysters, the silver Tazza to the glass goblet, you have each and every object is painted with its specific characteristic. He has captured the real appeal, real appearance of these objects, and this is possible because oil paint as a medium provides this possibility to paint in such a detail, in such kind of a realism. So oil medium really has expanded the possibility of capturing the world into painting, right? So this is a very good example of the potential of oil painting. Oil paint, till now we have seen, when we have seen paintings, the surface is very smoothly painted. We don't see the pigment, we don't see the color or the oil paint, the paste, the pigment on the surface. So oil paint at a later stage is used in a different manner, and Rembrandt is one of the early artists who used oil paint in an impasto technique. Impasto technique means you paint in such a way that you use dabs of color, the marks of color. You can see the texture of color, as you can see on this in this slide, where Rembrandt has painted his self-portrait, but you can also see the brush marks, you can also see the marks of color, you can see the pigment, the material color, the pigment of oil. So it is to kind of create a more intense emotion, it is to create a sense of flesh on the body, right. So oil paint also is being used in different manners, where impasto technique is another important technique that oil painting makes it possible. Fresco doesn't make it possible. In fresco you cannot have impasto effect, but oil paint, because of its quality, because the linseed oil becomes a film and it becomes thicker and it stays, it doesn't go away, it doesn't break. So which is why oil paint gives this possibility to paint in impasto technique, and this is one of the examples. And you have another important and very famous example, the Starry Night by Van Gogh, right. This is a very famous painting and people get to see them, and there is a song also, the Starry Starry Night. So when you look at this painting, you can actually see all the brush marks on the canvas, on the surface of the painting, and all these brush marks are really laid out thick impasto with thick pigment, you know. So this is also an impasto technique, and see who has used impasto technique. When we look at it, is the Impressionists who have extensively used impasto technique. You know, the thick oil dabs, the thick pigments and the thick oil paint dabs are used by Impressionists, and Van Gogh learned that technique from the Impressionists, and you can see here the different visible brush marks and visible thick paint on the surface of the canvas. So after oil painting, we can see watercolor. Watercolor is also a very important and very old technique, but within watercolor you have different methods of painting. So one of the early ways of watercolor and one of the early ways of early techniques of using watercolors is opaque technique, or which is otherwise called gouache. So for example, the miniatures, the Indian miniatures from, let us say, 10th century, 11th century and later, Indian miniatures and extensively in the 15th, 16th century and 17th century, and it continues, the opaque and the gouache, what is called gouache. So Indian artists have used gouache extensively, right, and the artists of other countries also have used, and in Europe also artists have used gouache painting, gouache technique. Another technique is transparent technique, and transparent technique is very popular, where you don't mix white in it, you don't create a body of paint, but you use a very transparent layer of the pigment and you create images out of it, and we'll see some of the examples. Another technique is wash technique. Wash technique is a technique where you apply the color and let it dry, and then you wash it, so that what stays on the surface is a very few remnants of, or very faint appearance of the color, and the body, the particles of color gets washed away. So you do it some 10 times or 20 times as whatever your requirement is. So it creates a very interesting effect on the surface of the paper. So we'll see some examples of wash painting also. Another technique is tempera painting. So tempera is a process where it is a lengthy process where you can paint in layers. Unlike gouache, where you paint with a thick pigment, tempera is an opaque technique, but you paint in multiple layers. Maybe you paint, for example, if you are painting a tree, you paint the tree, the green color of the tree, maybe 10 times. So you are gradually increasing the intensity of green. So this gradual process is tempera process within watercolor. So for watercolor, you need a binding. So the tubes that we get, the watercolor tubes that we get, binding is already included in the tube. But generally, traditionally, watercolor is painted using powder colors, right, using earth colors prepared by the artists themselves. So then they needed a binding material, which is sometimes the gum, sometimes the tamarind gum. So different binding materials are used. So let us see some examples. So this is a gouache painting. This is an example of painting by Nandalal Bose, and as you can see, the pigment is applied with a thick body. You have a sense of the thick color, thick application of color on the surface of the paper. So where you don't see the paper behind the color, right? And the application is also not in that gradual manner like in the context of tempera, but it is more bold and the pigment is more thicker. This is the example. This is an example of transparent watercolor. So if you look at this painting, the paint is applied where the pigment is very less in the water. So you have diluted the pigment and you have applied. So if you look at the monkey is painted with just one wash, one wash of the brush, one time of the brush, and so with the paint, with the paper behind and this transparent watercolor, by interacting with the paper, it creates one of the hues, one of the shades of the color, or one of the tints of the color, right. So this is an example of transparent watercolor. This is another example of transparent watercolor. What happens in transparent watercolor is your paper gets interacted with the color. Your paper is not hidden. So the color, its shade or its tint or its hue is revealed with the interaction with paper behind. So paper lends itself in watercolor. It is not only a surface on which you paint, but paper interacts with the color that you apply onto it. So the color of the paper, the whiteness of the paper comes through the color of the transparent watercolor. That is very important. Like here, if you look at the yellow that he is painted or the blues of the buffalo, you have the transparent color, and the transparent color reveals the paper through it and it makes it look more fresh, more vibrant. This is another example where the paper is revealed to a lesser extent and quite a realistic painting, but still white pigment is not used. Here the watercolor is applied in a transparent technique and you have more layers applied, you have more darker shades applied, but thick pigment is not applied. It is not opaque, but this is transparent watercolor. This is an example, this particular image that you see is an example of wash painting. Wash painting in India is created by Abanindranath Tagore. Abanindranath Tagore sort of invented wash technique in the early 1900s, and this is an example where, as I told you, you apply the color and then you remove the color by washing it. So what stays on the paper, that you repeat that wash by applying and removing. So you get a more mysterious effect within the painting. You can create that mysterious effect and a very lyrical effect. So if you want to create such effects, you can use wash painting. This is another example of, this is an example of tempera, where the tempera is, again as I told you, the tempera is a technique where you apply color in layers, right, one layer after another, and you can decide according to the intensity of the color that you want, the deeper red or deeper blue or deeper color, according to the depth of the color that you want, you can apply the number of layers. This is by Nilima Sheikh, and this is the same technique, the tempera on paper, the tempera technique used by watercolor by Lalu Prasad Shah, an important modern artist. This is an example of miniature where again the same technique of tempera is used, and sometimes tempera, sometimes gouache, but so this is a type of painting. So we have seen some of the modern paintings in the context of watercolor, and this is in the context of watercolor, this is a painting that which is pre-modern, which is medieval painting, and medieval painting is largely to do with either kings or king's lifestyle or king's history or the religious themes. So this is a theme, this is a story of Varaha Avatara, where Vishnu is lifting the land, lifting the Bhudevi from the sea. So this is an example of it, and this is another example of watercolor, but a miniature coming from Basholi, Himachal Pradesh. So this is Durga, right? So Durga is standing right in the center, you have the flat background, and you look at it, the pigment is slightly transparent, slightly opaque. So the artist here has used both ways of painting, using somewhere transparent technique and somewhere opaque technique. So same Durga, 𝗬𝗓𝗎, when we look at the modern artist, this is an artist, the Indian artist of progressive movement called 𝗬𝗶, is from Bombay. So this is Buffalo Slayer. Buffalo Slayer is nothing but 𝗬𝗓𝗎, the Durga killing Mahishasura. And this is an example of acrylic painting. Acrylic paints, it's famous now, it's popular acrylic medium. Acrylic came as an alternative to oil paints. So oil paint would take days and days to dry up, but acrylic paint would dry quickly. Like watercolor, it would dry quickly. So artists started using from the 60s and 70s, they started using acrylic on canvas and acrylic on paper. It's like watercolor, but watercolor you can wash away after it gets dried, but acrylic doesn't get, it cannot be washed away, it stays on the canvas or paper. It's more like plastic layer on the surface of the canvas or the paper. So we have few examples of acrylic medium. This is one. This is a very famous artist, Syed Haider Raza, S.H. Raza, and this is a sort of an abstract painting that he did using acrylic on canvas. And this is an example of abstract painting, and the composition is very abstractly done, and it is more about the mood rather than what you see in the painting. So after acrylic, what we have, another very important traditional medium is egg tempera. So in the tempera process, if you use egg, either egg yolk or egg white, it is called egg tempera. Egg, the white egg or the egg yolk, it works as a binding material. It works as a material that, as a gum. So traditionally, egg yolk is used by the artist, and it is in the modern times, egg white is used by the artist to create an interesting impasto effect. And this is a medieval egg tempera panel, Saint Catherine of Alexandria. It's again an icon painting, as we have seen some icon paintings earlier. This is an icon painting, and the painting is done using egg yolk, the yellow part of egg, as the binding material for the dry color. This is another example of the same technique. Along with egg tempera, the artist has used gold foil here, gold leaf, to make it look more elegant and divine. This is an example of egg tempera, but where egg yolk is not used, egg white is used. So egg white has a quality that it gets dried very quickly, it gets dried easily, and it is more, it's not smooth when it gets dried. So artists have mixed the powder colors with egg white, and they have created images. So it creates a sense of texture, an effect of texture on the surface of paper or canvas. And this is one of the examples by 𝗂𝗽𝗍𝗪. 𝗂𝗽𝗍𝗪 is an exponent of egg tempera technique in India. This is another example of the same technique by 𝗂𝗽𝗍𝗪. Srinivasachari, who is a contemporary artist who also uses egg tempera extensively. And in Hyderabad, only these two artists who are currently practicing egg tempera, Srinivasachari as well as 𝗂𝗽𝗍𝗪. And finally, we look at a very traditional technique called kalamkari. Kalamkari is done on cloth, and it is a dyeing technique rather than painting technique, but the drawing that they do and the application of paint is more in the manner of you draw on the paper, but the technique, the emergence of color and the development of form on the surface of the cloth is very different from how it happens on the paper. Like you apply and then you use different dyes, so you have a complex process of multiple stages. So we have seen today a variety of painting techniques, painting processes from prehistoric times to the contemporary times, and from the modern ways of painting to a very traditional ways of painting. So painting is not something about representing the world, but the technique, the medium and the methods are very important when you look at painting, when you do painting. Thank you.